Okay, welcome to the 5th SunoikisisDC Digital Classics Common Session. Today we have Francesco Mambrini from the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. Francesco is going to talk about who are the actors of the language of Thucydides in the section of his work about the Pentecontaetia. And today, this common session is the last one of our first main topic, which is about name entities for the Pentecontaetia and the Peloponnesian War. So, Francesco, you can start.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thanks for everything, and thank you all for joining in from literally all over the world. I'm very happy and honored to be here to give this talk. First of all, couple of technical notes. Can you all hear me? Is this coming loud and clear to everybody? Good.
Yes, I see Anise is saying yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes my my computer lets me down and the things crash. So I will try to touch as little as I can here in my setup. So you will hopefully you're going to be able to see my slides, and I will not give too many live demos of things that are on the web. But the links, the hyperlinks to the tools, to some of the tools are online. If ever Firefox crashes on me, just wait a couple of seconds and I'll be back to you.
Yes. And, don't worry about that.
There wouldn't be too much problems. Okay, I will be able to see the live chat. So if ever you want to stop or just want to ask a question, just type a few words over there, and I think and if not, Monica will just notify me, look, we have a question, and so we can hopefully make it as interactive as possible. So I'm very happy, not only to be here, but also of the collocation, as Monica said, of my intervention here, because I think that the people who made the syllabus, especially Monica and Professor Neven Jovanovic, did a very nice job in organizing all this talk, and it's a very important position that you have given me also. Because hopefully what I want to do today is articulated in 2 points, let's say. I will talk about ancient history, right? I will try to take what we said in this, this first session and wrap it up, talking about how to study ancient history and the concept, and try to look at the work that some of you have done concretely on the text. So, first of all, first point, ancient history, I write in my slides, is a lot of fun. And I mean it for everybody, for all of you, for the computer scientists as well as for the philologists, the linguists, and everything. Because basically, if you want, obviously simplifying, but if you want, you can imagine that studying ancient history is just a little bit like solving riddles, solving puzzles, putting the pieces together, which in a little more scientific way we would call reading the sources, no matter whether the sources are ancient texts, literary texts, of which I am more expert, archaeological data like objects, monuments, surveys of excavation, or inscriptions, other kind of objects that I'm not particularly expert of, but extremely important. And it's all about working together. So Monica has said many times that she has both computer scientists and humanists in the classroom, and it's very important to stress that this work of solving riddles can and must involve both sides. Meaning, what I mean by both sides is very important, that as experts of ancient history, we must try to look for digital approaches and computational approaches to have a better idea of our sources. At the same time, we should not remember that our data are peculiar and must be interpreted, deciphered, read with the instruments that are peculiar to the humanists. So it's really about communicating together. And as I said, what I would try to do is take some of the concepts, very important concepts, very important characters that were mentioned, like for example Pericles, Cimon, that were mentioned by Kenny Morrell a couple of lessons ago, or concepts like in the last lessons, but where we spoke about polis, the city, the citizenship, and democracy, and so on, and try to look closer at those concepts in at least one of our sources. And the sources, I repeat, as Monica said before in the opening, is a passage in the work of the 5th century historian Thucydides, who was writing a very long and very important historical work about what he judged to be the most important event in his time, the war between Sparta and Athens. But at one point, in explaining, this is probably the most important legacy of Thucydides as an historian. At one point, in trying to understand what were the causes that brought about this world war at his time, it was really a world war for Thucydides in his time, he narrated the history of what happened before, in the 50 years that separated the end of the war between the Greek cities and the Persian invaders, the Persian Empire that invaded Greece, and the clash between the beginning of the war between Sparta and Athens. So let me start by giving you a sample of what I mean, of the many problems that come when reading these sources. Let us imagine that we are projected back, time machine, at the year 464 before Christ. And we are in Greece at that time. And so to give you a little bit an idea of what happened, in something like 15 years before that, the most important battles, the decisive battles in the war between the Persians and the Greek cities took places, and the Greek won. The alliance of the Greek cities, and among them Sparta, and not all the Greek cities, but some of the Greek cities that resisted the Persian invasion, and among them Sparta and Athens, won a couple of decisive battles, like the battle at Salamis Sea, the battle of Plataea by land, another sea battle at Mycale. And we consider, as historians, this as the end of the Persian war between the Greek cities and Xerxes. But at the time, it was not clear that the war had ended. And the Greeks were very concerned that the war might continue. In 478, probably, the dates are not certain, so most of the time it's very complicated to establish a dating, but let's assume what is mostly believed, and even if it is, we can discuss about the exact dating. In 478-77, another alliance was founded under the hegemony of Athens, that is called in modern time the Delian League, and whose treasury was, and the places where the meeting were held of this league was in the island of Delos. Then afterwards, in the 50s, it was moved to Athens, so as to mark again the predominance of Athens. And this league actually pursued a very aggressive agenda against the Persian Empire, and had really the ambition to free the Greeks that still were living in the coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey. And especially in the 70s, under the direction of the Athenian general Cimon, the League scored very important successes against the Persians, but not only that. Cimon pursued really a very ambitious agenda all over the Aegean Sea and the north, even notwithstanding the war, the goal of liberating the Greek worlds from the Persian threat. But, like for example, Cimon led expeditions to Thrace, to Thracia, and to the northern Greek, like the island of Skyros. I will not show you this hyperlink that you see in the third bullet point for 76-75 leads to a page on of a project that I worked for. That it's called Hellespont, that collects some geographic data and shows plotted on the map the locations that cities talks about. So these events that I'm talking about are rated by 2 cities, and there you can see a whole distribution of this link. I will not show it to you, both for time's sake and because I don't want to screw up my projections here. But at the same time, this Delian League was starting to have to witness the rise of some conflict between the allies and the Athenian leaders over there. And some of the members in the Athenian League revolted against Athens. And most likely in the 465, revolt broke up in the island of Thasos, northeast of Greece. Actually, Thasos is the place where the next, as Monica said, the next Sunoikisis general meeting will be broadcasted from. So keep that location and that name in mind. And the Thasians, it is said, were also, Thucydides says at least, also wanted to call the Spartans on their side to help them in their revolt against the Athenians. In the end, nothing came out of this, also because the Spartans could not engage into other politics because they were already pretty much occupied by their own business. Why? In the years before, it is not sure how many years, but most likely very close to this year, 465, 464, a major earthquake, Thucydides said the earthquake, ravaged the whole area of Sparta and probably caused many casualties in Sparta. It was a major disaster. And taking advantage of this disaster that struck the Spartans, the populations of the Messenia and Laconia that were in Spartan society held mostly as it's not sure if we can call them really slaves, but were living as public slaves of the Spartans, the Helots, that were a constant threat against. They were one of the bases of Spartan economy, meaning that were the people that were working the land to sustain the Spartan citizens, but were always a constant threat to the hegemony of this group of Spartan citizens. Started a rebellion against Sparta's domination. And so a war broke between Spartas and a sort of a civil war in Sparta broke up, which is called the Messenian War. It was not the first time that it happened. A war started between the Helots, the rebel, and Sparta, and the state of Sparta. And in the end, these Helots were assembled together in Mountain Ithome. You see it on the map on my slide. And the Spartans were unable to destroy this, to besiege and definitely conquer these Helots. And so they called for various allies. So Thucydides says at one point in the narration of this, of the events of those years. And since the Athenians were still allied with the Spartans, because together they have fought in the Persian War against the Persian, the Athenians also were called. And Cimon, the leader of the Athenians at the point, one of the generals in Athens, decided to help the Spartans in the siege of Ithome. So most likely a couple of years later than 4764, so 462, Cimon led an expedition of the Athenians to help the Spartans win over this revolt and finish. So let's hear what Thucydides has to say about what happens after this expedition. It was clearly a very important moment for Thucydides in the events that led from the Persian War, the war against the Persians, where Sparta and Athens were allied, to the war Great war between Sparta and Athens, the Peloponnesian War that will occupy Thucydides' narration. And Thucydides writes, this is chapter 101 of the first book in Thucydides' history. Probably it's 102. I forgot to write the reference, but you will find it very easily. Anyway, Thucydides writes. So let's see how Thucydides, fairly contemporary of, well, indeed a generation later, but anyway, much closer than us, to the events, how he described what followed. The first open quarrel between the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans that means, and Athenians arose out of this expedition. So this is very important. This is the first time that tension that was growing between these two powerful states really broke off into an open dispute about them. The Lacedaemonians, when assault failed to take the place, okay, the Athenians could not help in concluding the siege, apprehensive of the enterprising and revolutionary character of the Athenians were governed by a democracy, began to fear that if they remained, they might be tempted by the besieged in Ithome to attempt some political changes. So Thucydides says the Spartans were basically worried that the Athenians might side with the rebels to attempt some political democratic change in the region. They accordingly dismissed the Athenians alone of the allies, so the Athenians alone were dismissed, without declaring their suspicions, but merely saying that they had no need of them. But the Athenians, aware of their dismissal, did not proceed for the more honorable reason that they were not needed, but from suspicion, which has been conceived by Spartans, went away deeply offended and conscious of having done nothing to merit such treatment from the Lacedaemonians. And the instant that they returned home, they broke off the alliance. So the alliance is broken, which was made against the Persians, the Mede, and allied themselves with Sparta's enemy Argos. So this is a point where everything changes openly, and the old alliance is broken, and a new hostile alliance started to, the Athenians have started pursuing a very anti-Spartan foreign policy. This is how Thucydides tells the fact. Let's see how a modern historian, and I wrote the reference to P.J. Rhodes' book, let's see how a modern view of the same event sounds. When Sparta asked for help, we saw, Cimon wanted to help. Ephialtes, who is Ephialtes? It's not very important. It's very important, yes, but in this context, it's not very important. Let's say that he was a politician, another Athenian politician, who was very famous for his constitutional reforms at Athens. Even if we won't be, actually, your professor is Monica Berti is a big expert about that. But let's not talk about this. So Ephialtes did not want to help, and again, Cimon was successful. The Athenian went in this expedition. It was probably while he was away that Ephialtes gained a winning position in Athens and enacted his reforms. The Spartans, suspicious of their Athenian allies, sent them away. We saw that. Cimon, on his return, tried to reverse the reforms, but he was unsuccessful and was ostracized. Kenny Morel talked about ostracism. It was basically banished from Athens by public vote, exiled for 10 years under this public voting ceremony that was ostracism. His opponents objected both that he was pro-Spartan. Let's not forget that Cimon had a son whose name was Lacedaemonios, and anti-democratic. And Athens turned to an anti-Spartan foreign policy. Now, do you notice the same thing that I noticed in this comparison? And of course, I made it clear by highlighting the keywords for me in here. What I note is that whereas Thucydides talks about the Athenians, the Spartans, and he talks about these two entities, right, as a very compact groups that act unitedly towards pursuing some certain policy, a modern historian tends to emphasize another aspect of this. He tends to emphasize, that's what Peter Rhodes emphasized here, emphasize the aspect of a political debate that was taking place within the group of Athenians. Granted, this paragraph is taken from a chapter that's on political life in Athens, but it's something very important that this event is told in a paragraph that's not dealing especially with the Athenian foreign policy, but the interaction between foreign and internal policy in Athens, where two big politicians, Cimon and Ephialtes, two personalities in politics, are highlighted, are under the spots so much. So this is kind of an interesting, different way. I mean, Rhodes, of course, doesn't invent all this. It takes this from other sources, right? But and if you look at this passage, you see that I cut somewhere some references around here. You will see that these references are mostly taken by Plutarch, who was not an historian, even if it's very important for historians, but he was an author of the imperial age, who wrote actually biographies of especially Cimon and other important persons in this time. So and of course he had this information from earlier sources, so it's considerably, I mean, it's considered reliable by historians. But anyway, this is not the way Thucydides tells the story. If you look for mentions of Ephialtes' reforms in the history, well, good luck finding them. You will not find a trace of this debate. And Ephialtes was killed, actually, in the tumults that followed his very dramatic moments. But you will not find a reference to this in the history of that Thucydides is telling. Now, I'm not inventing, of course, this, and I'm not the first one who noticed this thing. If you want to, you can have a look at books that tells that investigate this kind of phenomena in the way Greeks thought about their histories, and I have a couple of them. Arnaldo Momigliano, great Arnaldo Momigliano, wrote an important book on the fact that biography was not a genre for historians, unlike in our time. It was not a genre that historians used to write, right? Especially in the 5th century, historian was more of a social, I mean, historians tended to think more of social agents and political history of big groups instead of individuals, especially in the Greek world. And then, does this have to do with the way of this highlight on groups, on single cities acting like the Athenians did this and the Spartans reacted this, instead of this particular group of political that had to see the Cimon as a chief reference in their policy, pushed forward this agenda and were successful, which would be more the modern view of the things. Does this have to do not exactly with democracy, but with the way conflict was dealt with in the mentality, like Nicole Lorho has investigated in the internal conflict, meaning political conflict within cities? Well, it's possible. It's too big of a discussion to go through here. What I am interested in, though, is the fact that this very huge, very fascinating topic in ancient history can be actually studied with our sources, with our text, with our digital text. What you have been doing, some of you have been doing so far, was exactly annotating names. And names are, as I write, piece of language, are part of language, and are within our text, and we can annotate them like you did, and we can interrogate those texts to extract data. So we can make use of the work that you did, and that we can all continue doing, to answer some of these questions. So let's try. Let's ask ourselves a couple of these questions. For example, first that comes to my mind considering this peculiar angle that I took. Do ancient historians focus or use more nouns for collective entities, like we said we saw in this passage of Thucydides? The Athenians, the Spartans, instead of Cimon, Ephialtes, Pericles, etc. And can we see a distinctive role of individual versus groups in the narration? And thirdly, and very interestingly for me in this context of Sunoikisis, can we get this answer from your annotated texts? Can we use your texts to do this? Let's try. It would be very nice if we could have all Thucydides annotated in English. I mean, if we could have all the text of Thucydides annotated with names, and names classified in these groups that in these different types that I mentioned before, like geographical locations, person, organization, and other. Well, I tried. I tried to take the histories in English, and I can share with you in the GitHub repository what my experiments were, and annotate all of them. And this is what I got. As you can see, organization was the label that I used for especially collective nouns. There are not so many organizations in the text of Thucydides like in the modern sense, like companies or groups of people other than peoples themselves. So whenever its organization is 99% of the time the Athenians, the tag that is used to annotate instances like in those first passages, the Athenians, the Spartans, the Corinthians, etc. And this is the most numerous group, right? It's almost 4,000 occurrences of that. Location is the second best, so it's little less than 3,500 occurrences. Persons, like specific individuals, is much less. It's a little more than 1,500, so almost the half, more than a half of the, or mostly the half of collective nouns, and significantly less than location. This is in English, though. What can we do with these numbers? Well, to tell you the truth, virtually nothing. We can get an idea. We can get, we can be pushed in our attempt to understand things, but it's not enough. There's no conclusion here. First of all, because it's English, and English is not Greek. And I will show you in a while what I mean, where these numbers are a little bit biased by the fact that they are a translation from English. Secondly, we have nothing to compare that with. It took me a while, later I'll tell you how I did it, to work to obtain these numbers, and I have nothing to compare with them. Is this peculiar of Thucydides? Is this typical? Is this in line with what we see in other genres of literary, I would say, word literature, whatever language, whatever is written in English, so that this is somehow peculiar of Thucydides? Is this peculiar of Greek histories? Can we compare that with other Greek historians also in Greek? No, we can't at the moment. The best that I can offer to you is some comparison between what I found in with modern novels in this nice article from an expert in computational linguistics. Is published in the Literary and Linguistic Computing of 2013. As you can see, in terms of percentage of tokens of names on the total of tokens, well, there are a lot of names in Thucydides, but it's not so overwhelmingly abundant as I thought. There's not so. I mean, Thucydides is not distinguished according to this data by this high percentage of nouns, as I at the beginning thought. That would be an interesting thing to consider. This is a list of a few novels that this scholar took for her studies. As you can see, in these novels, person names are most often more than geographical names, right? This is the table, and the few novels where these novels are mostly in Dutch and English, and sometimes English translation of Dutch novels. As you can see, sometimes they are more, sometimes in few cases geographical names are more than personal names. But then again, we can't do very much with this data because I don't know exactly if my annotation is the same as her annotation, right? In Thucydides, though, based on our numbers, it seems that locations are more, considerably more than person names. an interesting question. Why did I use the English translation? And how did I do? Did I annotate all this named entity myself? Almost 10,000 named myself. No, I did not. I used the standard tool for named entity recognition and classification, the Stanford named entity recognizer. You can try, and it would be very interesting if you are into computational linguistics to see how it works, and if that would work somehow on Greek, on the ancient Greek language. Obviously, you need to train a model, and then this model trained on a specific test would be applied to the unannotated test. So how did this tool perform in the English of Thucydides? Well, I would say well enough in recognizing the named entity, not well in classification, but that's completely understandable because I worked with the trained model out of the box. And it's obviously one thing to train a model for named entity recognition on modern newspaper, completely different thing to work on ancient things. So it would be already interesting though to evaluate this. I didn't do it. And come up with a model, an annotated model for trained model for the Stanford NER that could work on English translation. That we can start thinking about those numbers and see if they really make sense or not. But we can leave this be for the present. Let's move rather to Thucydides in Greek. What can we do with the Greek? Well, one problem of Greek is the fact that you, as you know very well, if you have taken at least a few Greek classes on ancient Greek language, Greek is morphologically very complex, right? So that we at least, if we want to see the words in Thucydides, at least we have to work with lemmas, with dictionary words, right? And not with the different forms of these words, because it would be it wouldn't mean very much. Luckily, thanks to Professor Crane, we have a fully lemmatized version of Thucydides. That means a text of Thucydides where every word is assigned to its dictionary form, to the form that you see that you look in the dictionary whenever you find, I don't know, the accusative plural, for example, form Athenaios, and you want to look, what does that mean? You go to Athenaios, of course, to the lemma. And we have a digitized version of a lemmatized text in Thucydides. Now we can start thinking of measuring, counting the different lemmas in the text of Thucydides. Well, I did that. How do the named entity comes out of this account? Let's have a look. I wanted to show you a nice tool that you might be interested in using. Here we go. This is a nice tool that I use for doing some nice and sophisticated, but even sophisticated, cool and sophisticated corpus work. It's called Voyant Tool, and you've got the URL in my slides. If we load the whole text of Thucydides minus the Pentacontatia on one hand, and the Pentacontatia on the other hand, so we can keep these two parts separated, the Pentacontatia and all the rest of Thucydides, in Greek, lemmatized, we can have pretty much a good idea on how these words are distributed. As you can see, unfortunately, I don't know if you see it very well, but the word cloud, which are very cool over here, have problems with Unicode, with Greek Unicode. But anyway, it's already pretty clear that the most frequent word in this text, the whole corpus, in the whole text of Thucydides and without the Pentacontatia and the Pentacontatia, is Athenaios, which is the lemma that you will find whenever you will find the Athenians. Well, okay, obviously, it's also the adjective. So, as in the first line, the first two words of the Peloponnesian word, which means Thucydides, the Athenians, wrote the war of the Peloponnesus, the Peloponnesian War, etc., etc. This is also an Athenaios, and it will not be the case that is interesting. But if you remember our numbers, the case of where the adjectives are used are significantly less important. So it's already going in an interesting direction to notice that Athenians is the most frequent word in this. Athenian is the most frequent lemma in all the texts of Thucydides. Interesting thing, this graph over here on the right that I don't know, can you see it? Shows you the trend, the distribution between the Pentacontetia on the one hand, and the whole Thucydides on the one hand, and the Pentacontetia, the relative frequency per 10,000 words. As you can see, in the Pentacontetia, the Athenians skyrocket, right? This curve is pretty sloped, right? What does that mean? It would seem that Athenians is really a keyword, technically speaking, of the Pentacontetia, meaning that its frequency is much higher significantly higher in one text in comparison with the other part of the text. This would be, if confirmed, a statistical method that is used to a statistical way of reasoning to argue that Athenian is a keyword of a section of our text, in our case of our text, in comparison with the rest of the corpus. Is this low slope statistically significant? You can do, if you are expert in mathematics and computational linguistics, you can do your calculation about that. I did using a method that is called the logarithmic difference. And I can tell you that it is. It's statistically very significant, the difference in the distribution between these two parts. So we can be fairly sure in concluding that Athenian is indeed a keyword in the Pentacontetia. Not surprisingly, maybe, because this Pentacontetia, starts as a digression on how the Athenians became so powerful that the clash with the Spartans was inevitable. And so this section really deals, even much more than the rest of the work that deals with the war between Sparta and Athens, with Athens. Spartans, as you see, also have a higher concentration in the Pentacontetia. The lemma for Spartan also have a significant concentration augment in the frequency in the Pentacontetia, but it's much less sloped. It's probably still interesting and still significant, but much less than what's happening for the Pentacontetia. And by the way, you can notice with the distribution of the first most important word in the Pentacontetia, I have written a few of them in a table over here, that we've got two lemmas that are mostly used for collective groups, Athenians, Spartan, but not for individuals. We have Athenian, not even for specific places. We have Athenian, we have ship, we have polis, the city, we have the verb to become, also to be, the word that means many, the word that means to have, the words that mean the first, like he was the first or the first clash as before, the words that mean to do, and the word that means ally, which is also interesting in a way to tell the content of this of Thucydides' work. But it's fairly important that among these general words, we have also two important words that refer to groups, right? Athenian, Spartans. Let's have a closer look to the Pentacontetia, right? And in the project that I mentioned before, Hellespont, we actually annotated the named entities, and so we are fairly confident that these named entity that we wrote are there in the text, because we did the work by hand and we revised on the Greek. And so we can have this distribution that before I showed in this bar chart in a much more and on the English, on a much more concentrated way here. We can be much surer of this number, and we know that this number relates to the Greek text. What do we see here? Well, that collective names, and also we distinguished between Athenian as the adjective, as in Thucydides the Athenian, so we don't even have this problem, and the Athenians. We only annotated the cases of the Athenians, in this case, as collective entities, as organization, as I said before. So, in this text, among the named entity, 50% of them are collective. This is a big confirmation of what we were mentioning before. 34% are places, only 15% are names of individuals. This is interesting. Again, take it as an indication of a possible direction of studies, because we need to make comparison between what happens in other genres or in completely unrelated genres, but still numbers are pretty impressive, right? And also seemed to me that the relation between collective and places is a little more on the balance for the collective, right? The difference is bigger than it was before. Why that? Well, if you notice, when we translate in our modern language, we tend to alter the Greek text a little bit. Where Thucydides would say, the Athenians did this, the Spartans did this, most modern treatment would say Athens did it, Sparta did this, using the abstract geographical location to mean the political institution of that were governing the citizens of Athens and Sparta, etc. All right, so we got a question for Dimitar, which is very good. Yeah, Symmachos is a very important one, indeed. Right now, though, I am concentrated on, and this is significant, it tells something about both the Pentacontetia, because the word, for example, Symmachos is very important in both in the Pentacontetia and in the general text of Thucydides. As I said before, the whole story is a story of the relation between not just two cities, but two blocks. And the question of the relations within these blocks is even sometimes more important than the clash between these two blocks. But at the moment, I am concentrating on named entities. And so if words like allies, right, Symmachos, lemma Symmachos, are very important, and understandably they are, and also naus, and those who know the history of Athens would know that there is a reason why ships are so important. It's not by chance. Still, two collective nouns are as important as these fundamental questions and thematics in 5th century history. Spartans, Athenians. Not so much with individuals, apparently. Try to imagine what would be in a modern history of the Third Reich with the name of Adolf Hitler, for example, right? It would probably be otherwise. The distributions of the names would be probably very different than what Thucydides does with these individuals and these groups. That doesn't mean anything. This is just an hypothesis and probably a very trivial and stupid one. It's an indication, though, and it tells us something about the text of Thucydides, though, at least I think. But does that mean that individuals are absent or individuals are trivial, not important in the work of Thucydides? Well, those who say so would, in my opinion, say a very, very stupid thing. It's not that individuals are not important agents or actors in the text of Thucydides. It's just that they play a specific role in the way Thucydides thinks about history and in the way Thucydides writes about history. But this place of individuals is as interesting as what we were discussing before. Only thing is that we have to be ready to read them, not probably in the big numbers, but in specific passages. So let's look at the instances of who are those names, those persons that we named and we annotated in the Greek text of the Pericles. Again, manual annotation on the Greek text when we found all the instances of name, a Greek name, and we annotate it as person. These are the persons that get more than two mentions, access to cities, and you can see that some of them, a group of 4 people, just gets more than 5 occurrences, right? And if you know something about the history of this period, this list is like, wow, a big confirmation of something good going on. They are, in fact, important characters in the history that Thucydides is telling. Pericles, which you might remember from Kenny's lesson. Pausanias, we will talk about him in a second. It was the general that won the battle, that led the Greek in the battle of Plataea, and the father of the future Spartan king, Pleistoanax. And this is why it's starred, because it should technically have 2 more occurrences, because it's mentioned 7 times, but 2 times it's just as a sort of surname, like Monica explained to you in the first lesson, like Pleistoanax, the son of Pausanias. So it's technically not him that is mentioned, right? It's more Pleistoanax, even if he is mentioned. So anyway, I kept only the 5 instances where it's really a matter of Pausanias. Themistocles, general of the Athenians in the Battle of Salamis, and shaper of the policy of the Athenians, and the Cimon that I mentioned before. So these are important persons, right? Okay, we might be tempted to say, wow, these persons, probably Pericles, who's got the most reference over here, are the important individuals that act in the Pentacontetia according to Thucydides, right? Well, not quite. First of all, the numbers, low numbers, should probably warn you that every quantitative analysis here is tricky, right? You cannot make so much on the distribution with so few instances. So careful over here. But there is much more, though, because if you mentioning a person by name, like saying Pericles did that in a fairly limited scope of text, it doesn't tell the whole story, right? You can say Pericles did that, but if you continue by saying, oh, he also did this one, and to his action we can attribute this and this and this and this, meaning that you can talk about Pericles and what Pericles did even without mentioning him, right? All right, can we have a look at this? I mean, at those places where something important, like an event, is attributed to these names, but without mentioning them. Keep in mind also that in Greek it's very easy, like we do in Italians. I don't know about Portuguese, to tell you the truth, or Slavic languages, but in Italian, for example, like in Greek and in Latin, we can leave the subject out, right? So we can simply say Pericles did this, and did that, meaning always Pericles, but without mentioning not even Pericles, but not even a pronoun like in English, like the E. So it's kind of tricky. But well, long story short, I tried to work out a system to do like just this. And I came out with what I call effective mentions, meaning grammatical verbs, nouns, participles, etc., where a person is involved with, like, as a subject, direct object, actor in semantic way, without being mentioned or being mentioned with a pronoun. You can read a couple of articles that I wrote if you are interested in the question. I can give you the references. So let's see what comes out of this, of these 4 important characters. Well, you see that there is no difference in Cimon between the effective mentions, I told you what I mean, and the 5 instances where it's mentioned. So every time Cimon does something, Cimon is mentioned by name. Cimon does this. Every time Cimon does something, and what does he do? Well, it's always the subject of the verb to be general. I didn't write this down, but it's if you look at the case of this, it's always genitive. Not surprising. It's genitive of the genitive absolute, Kimonos strateguntos, and it's typically in the form of the Athenians or the League did something, with Cimon acting as general, in the Cimon being the general, right? And so this is the way Cimon gets mentioned in the Pentacontetia. Is mentioned, and it's not the only one. There are other figures that are mentioned in the Pentacontetia because they had the role of general when the Athenians did something, achieved something. Very important, but also pretty limited, if you want. One time, it is mentioned the fact that the expeditions of the League to Cyprus is interrupted because Cimon dies. Pericles, the winner of our special, yes, indeed, yeah, Irini, it is a choice of, if you mean this, this is an important choice, yes, but we'll see more than that. When we leave also the interpretation to you, because probably there will be not much time to do the interpretation. Let's stick to what I think are facts. Pericles. Pericles is mentioned effectively, instead of the 7 direct mentions, 9 times. Again, it's the strateguntos, right? It's the subject of the verb strategeo, being the general. So, and there is at least one fascinating subject. It's important. I mean, they are put, these characters that are the generals are put under the spotlight of when this formula is used. And also, you see that a couple of more actions of Pericles are mentioned. To cut the story a little bit, it's because these mentions are, these actions are, these verbs, as you see, as verbs of actions, right? Pericles takes the action in military expeditions, and probably I will tell you more in a little more. And again, your professor Monica Berti is the person to ask, because most of this time, the time that Pericles is said to do something, is in the context of the war between Athens and Samos, on which Monica is a great expert. Let's see Pausanias. Right, Pausanias was the leader of the Greeks in the Hellespont, in the eastern part, that were continuing the war against, and it was Spartan, of course, against the Persian. But it was not liked at all by the allies, and especially the allies in Asia Minor, because he was arrogant, because he was acting, and it was starting to act like he was a tyrant, like he was substituting himself to the king, to the Persian king, and so the allies turned from him and to the Athenians. And this is how, Thucydides says, the Athenians got more control over the expedition, that in the end, ultimately, the Spartans would completely leave to them. And they would give just free hand to the Athenians over there. Pausanias is not important in Thucydides for what he does, as you see. And you see that it's mentioned quite a lot, right? Effectively, so to say. But it's more for something that is done to him. Because after he's hated, as you see, let me see if I can, oops, I'm sorry, if I scroll down a little bit. He's hated, he is, and it's then called back to Sparta, because he is accused of committing some crimes. He's led back to Sparta, is judged, and he is acquitted of some of these charges, but convicted of some of them. So, in the end, Pausanias is more important for what people do to him. The Spartans call him back home, and the allies aid him. Themistocles. Well, Themistocles is our star, if you see, from the effective mention. 46 times he is depicted as doing something important. And he almost always does something. What does he do? You can read the list. But if you take my summary, because it's also already pretty late, what he does is especially focused, unlike Pericles, who were depicted more for his military action, for his politics, for his policies, for his political action of speaking, of giving order, of ordering things, of consulting, of giving opinion, of having a specific policy, right? That he wants to pursue. And Themistocles is the person that is especially depicted. We can see over here, right? Probably we jump to this part. in a specific part of this Pentecostetia. Because if we go back to the simple mentions and not to the so-called effective mention, but keep in mind that, like in the modern languages, you can't have an effective mention without a direct mention in the nearby. You can't say he did this, he did that, and the he you're referring to was mentioned like 10 chapters before, because people won't understand you. You can say he did this, he did that, only if in the nearby you have a mention direct of the person you're talking about. So it's a good guide if we take the direct mentions. And you can see that the distribution of these names is very uneven in the part of on the Pentecostetia. And Themistocles is especially relevant in the first chapters, where the story that shapes the whole history of the Pentecostetia is told on how the Athenians tricked the Spartans into believing that they were not building a wall for themselves, something that the Spartans did not like, to protect their city, but in fact they were. And so Themistocles goes to Sparta, fakes for a while as much as he can that nothing's happened, and then in the end reveals, we have walls, because I said that we must have walls. And you Spartans, all you have to do is accept the fact. Pausanias is, of course, and you can see notice that there is some overlapping between the two. Pausanias is also important in the first part. As of a person group, should we annotate the pronouns as names? As a linguist, I will tell Anisa that I wouldn't, because this is another thing. Probably it would make sense to have them annotated in a sort of an historical annotation, right? Of sort of if you're making, some sort of a, should rely more on an ontology, right? Where people are just mentioned. As a linguist, I would say that pronouns are more part of what I would call, as a linguistic annotation, co-reference resolution, meaning a specific task when I take all the pointers, linguistic pointers, like the pronouns, and I refer them to what linguistically they refer to. So I would keep that distinguished for myself, because I like to keep the different linguistic levels distinguished. But this is probably a linguistic mindset of a computational linguist. Pericles, of course, as I said, is in the final bits, where he takes over the role of the general that leads the Athenians against Samos. Cimon, well, interesting. It's in the middle part, but also it was out of the It was out of the question for the ostracism for a while, but then he got back, and in his final part tried to make some other take some other actions. Again, well, yes, Themistocles and Pausanias are important, as you see, because Thucydides thought that they were extremely important, and you can see the reference. So I shut up, and unfortunately I won't leave so much time for discussion. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Francesco, for this excellent common session, because this is a great example. So how you can read ancient sources using linguistic annotations and computational techniques, so to get results for historians. So maybe for a computer scientist it was a bit difficult to follow the text, the names, the history, but this was really a great example of the results we get. So for those who know the history of the Pentecostetia, we get very, very interesting results. I don't know if there are any questions. We are a bit over, but maybe...
I'm sorry.
No, it's not your fault, Francesco. It was very interesting. We have 1 hour, so it was perfect. It is for the student who... Any questions in the class or in the audience on Google Hangout? Well, we had some questions.
All right, so you see a question from Dimitar, which is very important.
Okay.
Passive, active voice. Okay, it's a long discussion, but to be quick, be very quick. This is based on a sort of semantic annotation, a semantic annotation that I discussed somewhere. So when I talk of what somebody does or what is done to him, I really talk on semantic roles, not on subject versus object, meaning that you can be subject of the verb to kill, syntactically, or of the verb to be killed, and your role semantically would change, the situation would change a lot. You can't say that you do something if you do what you do is to be killed. But I worked on semantics. So I can tell you that it's again a bit complicated, but most of the time when I mean to do something, I really mean be the semantic agent that does something. Which also mean it also includes, from syntactic point of view, the agent of passive verbs. So if you take the sentence, the Persians were defeated by the Greeks, Greeks would be annotated as the agent, the people that do something, and will show up in my statistics as doers, not person when to which something happened.
Okay, thank you. So, well, I remind you that we have, well, not only our Google Plus community for going on with the discussion, but especially GitHub. So we have a wiki in GitHub, so, and then we have the slides there. So if there are other questions, we can also in some way go on with the discussion there. But anyway, we have other common sessions in the semester, so we can discuss again.
Let me do some advertisement to myself.
Yes, of course.
If you are interested in knowing some more about the linguistic annotation, here is where I have written down most of the linguistics details. So it's,
yeah. Yes, thank you for the link. For this link, this is a link to your paper.
Oh, I should also say that most of this research was financed by the Center for Hellenic Studies, so I'm very grateful to them and very grateful to be here today. It has some sort of CHS sponsored, CHS related event, to say something, so good.
Yes, exactly. SunoikisIS is part of the Center for Hellenic Studies. Francesco was a fellow of the Center for Hellenic Studies, and he produced part of his work at the CHS. So this is good to see how the work is going on. And I will put the link in GitHub, so for anyone who is interested, they have your slides, but also your paper, so which is fundamental for understanding your data. So unfortunately, I have to end this common session, but Francesco, thank you very much. This was really an excellent common session, full of food for thought. And next week, I will be in Thasos, and also the following one, and we will have our common session from Thasos.
You will be in Thasos too.
You will be in Thasos?
No, you will be in Thasos. Oh no, we will.
I will be in Thasos.
Good.
Yes, I will be in Thasos. So see you next week, and thank you very much for your work, your participation, and your support to SunoikisisDC Digital Classics. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, bye, bye.